Hello, everybody, and welcome to Level the Field Leadership. My name is Dr. Rachel Gallardo, and I am very thankful, very excited that you have decided to tune in and to see what in the world are we going to talk about today as far as leadership goes. Today, we are going to dive into a little bit of a federal law known as FMLA. Stands for the Family Medical Leave Act. And the reason why I decided to go ahead and do a topic on this particular law is that because at the time of this recording, I'm just a little past 37 weeks pregnant with our son. So I know a lot about FMLA because of my background in HR and what I teach and things of that nature, but I'm not sure if there are a lot of leaders that really and truly know what this law is, what it means. Hopefully, you've got a really solid HR department that can kind of guide you through the ins and outs of this particular law. But I wanted to talk about it just so that way you know, as the leader, what to expect if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to be placed on leave. I know that that can be kind of intimidating because, oh no, what are we going to do? How long are you going to be out? Hopefully your first question is you ask the person if they're okay. That's a whole nother topic, and there's plenty of other topics you can scroll through in previous episodes to see how we can have a little bit more empathy towards our employees. But ultimately, this is something that I'm just in that season of life, and so I thought I would share my experience and not well, maybe not my experience fully, but at least give you some background of the law, so that way, if you are in a situation where an employee comes to you to talk about this, you've got this podcast that you can use. You can at least know what questions to ask and what questions you can't ask. So that way you can help your employee. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that I'm just here to keep it real. I mean, I'm, like I said, a little past 37 weeks pregnant. There's no makeup going on. There's nothing fancy about what I'm wearing. But you know what? We're going to show up. And as long as we show up, that's what matters. Some days, our 100% might look a little bit differently than other days 100%. But as long as we keep moving forward, I think that that's what's important. So welcome to my very plain, boring office with my boring black t-shirt and no makeup on. But anyways, if this is not your first episode, thank you so much for coming back. You know that I do believe that workplace burnout is very real, and anything that we can do to reduce burnout and fatigue in our leadership roles will ultimately positively impact our teams, will impact us in a good way. And ultimately, that's the whole point of this, right? I do try to post a new episode on the second and the fourth Tuesday of the month. So if this is your first episode tuning in, make a mental note of it, or better yet, go ahead and like and subscribe so that way you can be notified whenever I drop new content for you to hopefully enjoy. If you are just straight up an auditory learner, you people are my hero. I'm so happy to have you out there on an auditory land of Spotify and Amazon. So just keep tuning in, keep listening, but feel free to share this for anybody you know that is either going through this situation or maybe has some difficult personal family issues that are happening, because they may not even be familiar with what FMLA is. They may not even know that they have this right as an employee. And so at least you give them some information so that way they can go and talk to their HR department, so that way they can use the rights that they are entitled to as a full-time worker. And so for me, it's only fitting, for those of you that are returning, I kind of like to base things off of scripture. So our scripture today is Proverbs 17:6. Children's children are a crown to the aged, and parents are the pride of their children. So I thought it was fitting. Again, we're entering into a new season of life, my husband and I, and so just really excited about it. But we still got to talk about some of the legal aspects of what's going on. So Family Medical Leave Act, I'll call it FMLA, and I'll sometimes we'll just say Family Medical Leave Act, so those words are used interchangeably. Currently, whenever I was doing my research for this, there's approximately 56% of people working in the United States today that are covered under FMLA. So over half of the full-time workforce, and that's key, you do have to be a full-time employee to be eligible for this particular benefit, but there's over half of us that are eligible for this particular benefit should we need it. Now, what in the world is it? So basically this act was passed back in 1993 under President Clinton, and the primary purpose was to give eligible employees, so that's the key part, eligible employees, not every employee, but eligible employees, up to 12 weeks of unpaid job protected leave per year. Okay. So what kind of personal situations are we talking about here? Well, like in my situation, I'm about to birth our son. So in that instance, I would be covered for up to 12 weeks worth of leave time. If you need to adopt a child, you are covered up to 12 weeks. So it's not only birthing a child, but also adopting a child that this law covers. If maybe you have a serious health condition, so maybe you went to the doctor's office last week and they found out that they have to do some sort of emergency surgery, or you wake up in the middle of the night and your appendix ruptures and you've got to be out for 3 or 4 weeks while you recover from that. Any sort of serious health condition that you as the employee are having is covered under FMLA. These rules also apply if you need to care for a spouse, care for a child, or if you have a parent with a serious health condition. So, for example, my husband had surgery on his foot a couple of years back. And my situation is a little bit different because when you teach, you have contract months and then you have off contract. And so it's a whole thing. But if I needed to use FMLA while he was having his surgery and having to be recovered and was basically in bed for the first 2 weeks after the surgery, then that would qualify because I would need to stay home to be able to care for my spouse to help make sure that he recovers from his surgery. If you have a parent with a serious health condition, so maybe you got a terrible phone call that your dad had a stroke, and so you've got to go and take care of that, and then you've got to look at putting, dad in different living arrangements and things like that. It gives you that breadth of time, and so that way you don't have to worry about work stuff. You can take care of whatever personal stuff is going on, and then hopefully at the end of that 12 weeks, things have kind of leveled back out so you can go back to your position. I want to also note too that this law definitely covers people that are caring for returning service members from the military. So you might want to just kind of keep that in mind. Let's say your son is returning from being overseas and for whatever reason needs to come back and there's a medical condition there. Just check with your HR department because caring for somebody returning from military service is covered under FMLA as well. So birth or adoption of a child, serious injury to myself, serious medical condition to my child, spouse, or parent, or returning military member. Those are the four primary categories that FMLA will cover for a qualified employee. So I keep saying that word qualified. Now, so who in the world would actually be eligible for this? So there are some criteria that have to be met. Like I said, this doesn't apply to every single employee. It's not a blanketed thing that the law covers. Your individual company may have certain policies that are written a little bit differently. And if they want to extend and offer additional support or additional leave or, expand who this law might apply to, then that's on them. I'm focusing primarily on what the law says because most organizations are going to follow along what that federal law is. So, who in the world is eligible? Well, first and foremost, you have to be working for an organization, for an employer that has at least 50 employees within a 75-mile radius. So if you're working for more of a smaller business and there's only 30 to 35 employees that are working for your organization, the FMLA law does not apply to this particular company. But if you're working at one of those Fortune 500 companies or you've got a couple thousand people that are on the payroll and they're all full time, then FMLA automatically kicks in. Once an organization has 50 employees within a 75-mile radius of each other working for the organization, boom, just like that, the federal law is going to kick in. All right. Secondly, the employee must have worked at least 12 months for the organization, but these 12 months don't necessarily need to be consecutive. I know, here's where we kind of start to get into the gray. But if you've worked 12 months, and this isn't, from January to December, these are rolling calendars. So let's say you started in April of 2024. Once you hit your 1 year anniversary in April of 2025, you have now been with the organization for a year. And as long as your company has at least 50 employees, now you have now you're eligible for FMLA if you need it. Also, too, the employee must have worked at least 1,250 hours in the past 12 months. So if for whatever reason, you took time off, or maybe it was a seasonal position or something of that nature, then there might be some discussions that need to happen with your HR department just to make sure that you actually qualify for it. But most of us going to work on Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. I've been with this company for the last 3 years. There's about 500 employees. Most of us are going to qualify for FMLA. Like I said at the beginning of this, about 56% of workers in the United States qualify for FMLA. All right. So hopefully that clarifies any kind of confusion or myths about who's eligible and who's not. Now, when we talk about rights and responsibilities, in as often as you possibly can, the employee needs to notify the HR department that they will be taking leave. Like, you don't get to just disappear for 12 weeks and think that the company's gonna gonna keep your job. That's not how it works. Every employee, if they are eligible and if it is a qualifying event, there is some paperwork that you're going to have to fill out. There's some paperwork that the doctor will have to fill out. And our, HR is pretty well versed in understanding HIPAA compliance. So understanding that they should not be asking or like spreading your medical information and telling people all sorts of things. Now, granted, you don't have to give them a whole lot of detailed information. The doctor doesn't have to say what kind of surgery you're having, or I don't have to disclose, that I'm having a son or whatever. I can just say it's out for birth. There are some details that you don't have to necessarily give, but if in at all possible, you want to try to give your HR department at least 30 days notice to let them know, hey, I'm probably going to be out for a period of time. So now, again, if I go back to my example of, it's the middle of the night and my appendix ruptured and now I'm in the hospital and I'm going to be out for 3 weeks. I mean, there are some things that we can't avoid, like, dad having the stroke. We can't plan for those sort of things. So there are some things that, most HR departments are like, well, I mean, you didn't know that that was going to happen. We'll give you some benefit of the doubt there. But I mean, I've been pregnant for quite some time, so I definitely needed to let my HR department know ahead of time. Hey, guess what? I'm going to be out. I'm due on X day. And, then I can kind of talk logistics, not only with them, but then also with supervisor and things like that. So there is some medical documentation that does have to be turned in. And again, the law covers for your job protection and the continuation of your health benefits while you're out. The caveat to this, though, is that the employer does not have to pay you. So if you don't have any sick time, if you don't have personal time, if you don't have PTO time, then your job is still protected, but the time that you're out will not be paid. So the employer is not required to pay the employee to be out. You do need to figure out how you're going to reimburse your benefits, though. In most instances, at least in my previous corporate life, what we would do is we would talk to the employee early on. We might start taking out, an extra $100 per paycheck to kind of help cover them while they're going to be gone, and then we'll take the remainder of those payments, as it moves along. Some people just prefer to write a check and be like, okay, how much am I going to owe you for the time that I'm out, for how many payrolls I'm going to miss? We give them that amount, they write the company a check, and then we move forward. It really just depends. And that's why it's so important to talk to your HR department and really try to understand the logistics of how all of this works. Because you certainly don't want to be, you return to work and then think, oh, I'm going to get a regular paycheck. Meanwhile, HR is deducting a third of your paycheck to pay for back benefits. So it's one of those things that you want to try to plan for things as much as you possibly can. And financial burdens can just make whatever personal situation you're going through that much more stressful. So the more documentation you can have, the more conversation and just general understanding of what is going to happen before, during, and after your leave is super, super important. There are some instances where the HR department will actually shut off your access So you won't be able to access your emails, you won't be able to access any of your organization's programs or anything like that. And I'm actually kind of a fan of this because if you're on leave because you're, recovering for an illness, or, you're trying to get something taken care of with a sick parent, or, you've got something happening where somebody is returning from military leave from overseas and you're trying to take care of them, the last thing you want to worry about is some of the busy work or the very transactional things that can happen in our day to day. So shutting off our access is not always a bad thing. If you're a control freak, or if you use work as your escape, you may have to find other outlets to that. But quite frankly, if you're talking to your HR department, they're probably going to tell you, hey, guess what? You're going to lose access. So at least you can prepare and plan for that ahead of time. Um, Again, proper documentation is necessary. It is important to turn in paperwork. It is important that you go to your legitimate doctor. Like, don't just make up things. We want to make sure that we're actually going to a real doctor that's providing real information. We don't want to plagiarize things. We don't want to falsify information, because technically you're dealing with a federal law. So anything that's written in documentation can be used in a court of law. And you're going down a legal rabbit hole that you just don't want to go down. But again, with your FMLA and being gone, having that documentation in place, having those conversations are super, super important. Now, there is a possibility that your employer could deny your claim. So let's say and I'm just going to make this up, so it's going to be so grandiose, it's probably never happened before. But let's say I get a paper cut and I go to a doctor and I can get a doctor to say that I have to be out for 3 weeks for, the caring of my paper cut. Okay, that's a little outlandish. Very, very highly unlikely, unless I developed some insane infection and I became septic and this whole thing. You may have an HR department that's like, we need another opinion on your paper cut. So employers can deny, or they can at least request you to go get a second opinion. I have been in those sort of situations before. We just needed a little bit more understanding. Maybe there's just something that's really ambiguous that people don't know anything about as far as the disease goes. And so they do request maybe that just extra layer of medical confirmation to understand what's going on. Um, and there are some instances too where maybe the person doesn't need to be out for a full straight 12 weeks. So FMLA does allow for what's called intermittent leave. So maybe I don't need to be out Monday through Friday, but man, it'd be really helpful if I didn't have to come to work on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So maybe I just come in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I work for 5 or 6 hours on those days. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm out. All of that counts towards your 12 weeks that you're allowed to have under FMLA. So if you just kind of do the math on that, then obviously I would be able to take intermittent leave for longer than 12 weeks. But it's important that my hours are documented. And for any time not used working, I have to make sure that I'm notifying HR by either submitting sick time, personal time, vacation time, whatever your organization has. But you want to make sure that all of your hours are accounted for as a full-time employee. So if this is you might want to keep a log, write it down, create an Excel spreadsheet, do something, because that way you fully know what hours it is that you're supposed to be entering in for using your sick time. And then once you exhaust your sick time, if you still have FMLA hours available, that's fine, but you should not be getting paid for those hours if you're not working. Okay. So, and that's just true no matter what. If you're not working, you shouldn't be getting paid for it. Right. And if you're supposed to be at work, then you should be receiving pay for it. We're not going to double dip, and we're also not going to steal company time either. Got it? So there's a lot of kind of ins and outs that are there. There's a lot of very technical things that are there. There's some documentation that's got to occur, certified letters that have to be done and things of that nature. And it can seem overwhelming, but my biggest advice, my biggest recommendation, I really have two. Number one, just be fully transparent and authentic with what is going on. And then number two, be very methodical and check every box, not only from the employee's side of it, but then also from the manager's side of it. So I've had employees that have come to me and they've told me that for various reasons they've had to take leave. First and foremost, show some compassion because that person is going through a change of season in their life. And the more support that we can give them, the better. I've also had people that have come to me and said that they're going through these seasonal changes in their life, and they had no idea what FMLA even was, didn't know that they were eligible for it. So that was my opportunity from a leadership standpoint to be able to educate them and let them know. We did have to bring in HR just to make sure we got the paperwork done and things like that. But any way that you can alleviate burdens for people, that's something that they're really going to celebrate. And I think it's a really great thing. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind. Unfortunately, FMLA can be denied, like I said, because if you don't have the right documentation in place, or if you didn't, submit what you were supposed to submit, HR doesn't necessarily have to approve it. But if you do turn in what it is that you need to turn in, most of the time it's going to be approved. Now, let's say you're the supervisor and your employee goes out on leave. You know that they're going to be gone for 12 weeks, but then it's now 14 or 15 weeks and the employee just hasn't returned. Do you have to still keep that person's job? Well, the answer to that question is no, you do not, because FMLA only covers up to 12 weeks. So once you hit that 13, 14, 15 week mark, if that person is not returning to work, if they're not returning your phone call, it's completely acceptable for you to submit termination paperwork because the employee didn't bother to return. The employee didn't communicate when they were coming back. So it's just important to keep that in mind. Now you might be thinking, well, what about short-term disability? When does that kick in? A lot of that comes down to the particular state that you're living in. Does the employee, because usually short-term disability is kind of a supplemental insurance that people can either opt in or out of. So if the employee's got short-term disability, great. But the rider for that is up to the employee to figure out. So some short-term disability companies make you wait 14 days, some make you wait 30 days. It just depends on how it's written. But if the employee doesn't have short-term disability, then once they exhaust their sick and PTO time, they're on their own. And again, we as leaders can communicate that information to the employee because they may have even forgotten, yeah, you're right, I am paying $15 per paycheck for that short-term disability. Let me go see. And I only have like a week of vacation. So yeah, let me see if this is the time when it's going to cover me. So hopefully that kind of gives you just some very basic, very detailed information of FMLA. Again, it is a federal law. Again, if your organization has 50 or more employees, automatically that law kicks in. And if your employee has worked with you for over a year and they've done more than those 1250 hours, they do qualify. It might be an inconvenience for that person to be out. It may be annoying, it might be frustrating, but ultimately, and there's actually research that supports this, when we support people when they're going through a difficult time in their life, that actually makes them more loyal to the organization and to the leader for the long term. Because if you can't be there for me whenever I'm going through these things after I've already put in work for you, what is my motivation, my reason to stay? And so somebody might return from FMLA because, yeah, they need the job. Or you may have some instances where the person decides, you know what, whenever I take this leave, I'm going to hit it hardcore to try to find somewhere else to work because clearly these people don't really care about me. So we never want to put people in that situation, especially when they're going through really stressful seasons of their life. But understanding the law can be very, very helpful because we can support people whenever they need us the most. So I hope that this information was valuable for you. If it was, please, again, like and subscribe so that way you can find out when new content is going to be dropped. I do believe that you are made to be a leader right where you are, wherever you are leading. And I truly hope that this podcast can help you level the field of challenges you face as you walk the journey of leadership. Take care of yourself, take care of your team, share this information with somebody that you think could benefit from learning a little bit more about the federal law. And I totally believe that you can do this, you can be strong leaders. And until next time.